Hey y'all. So I just realized that Rise of the Jumbies is the sequel to The Jumbies. So I wondered if that was the case because it talked about something that happened before with her mom, with Corinne's mom and everything. So now it's really bugging me that this is the second book and we haven't read the first book. But I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 4 and 5 today. But if you're following along and it bugs you too, I'll go back and we'll read the first one because I can get it on my Kindle and we can start with it. It's about Corinne and her mom and her sister, who's you'll find out today. Anyway, so here we go. Chapter 4 and 5. Chapter 4, Another Way. A thin body rose out of the rocks and reached for the surface out of the sea. The creature's eyes shone yellow in the muddy water and caught sight of something, a shadow, far away, across the veil of water. It was shaded the same muddy green as the sea, but it had no eyes. It might have been nothing, a trick of the water or a school of fish moving slowly together. So after a few moments, the thin, twiggy creature from the rocks went carefully toward land. It stayed in the shallows, extracting breath from the water, and it began to remember. First it thought there was a plan. Then there was a girl who had stopped it. And last, there is always another way. Chapter 5, The Talk at the Market. Corinne pushed away the covers and squinted at the sun rising over the cliff. She went to the kitchen and looked out the back window. In the dim morning light, she could make out her papa on shore with the other fishermen. Some of them were working on the boats. Others were cleaning up the beach, and a few, mostly women, walked in a line. Corinne's heart sank. They were still searching for Laurent. Wherever he was, he had spent all night alone. She pulled her work clothes on, a pair of her papa's old pants and a shirt, and ran down to his yellow boat. He was smearing pitch from a metal pail over some cracks, filling them in with shiny black patches. The pitch smelled of sulfur. Corinne covered her nose and mouth with her hand. "What is it?" Pierre asked. Corinne's words stuck in her throat. It's Séverine," she whispered. Pierre glanced at the base of the cliff where the Jumbie had fallen. "What about her?" "I had a dream about her," she said. Suddenly, Corinne felt foolish to be worried about a nightmare, but she had already started. It felt real, like she was nearby and I could hear her, like she was coming up through the stones in the water. The wind picked up and Corinne shivered. Pierre wrapped an arm around Corinne, still holding the bucket with the other. "It was only a dream, Corinne. Nothing to be afraid of," he told her until she stopped shaking. Then he felt in front of her on the sand. "Sometimes," Corinne said, "I can hear her talking to me like she did that night on the cliff. I can hear her like she's in the same room." She took a deep breath. "You said that the ancestors are always with us. Séverine is Mama's sister." "Was," Pierre said. His face became hard for a moment. "All families are connected, Corinne. It's true. We don't get to choose who we share blood with, but we do get to choose how we are with each other. It's like your plants. You prune the pieces that are withering, and you encourage the ones that will bear fruit. That's how love works. We can feel the ones we love when they enter a room, even before we look up. Those are the connections we encourage. I feel the pull of the sea, not just because I love it, but because this is where your grandpère taught me everything I know. You feel rooted to the earth because that is where your mama taught you to grow things. That's love. And just so you know, that grandpère, that's French for grandfather." Pierre took one of Corinne's loosening plaits and rebraided it. "Listen carefully, Corinne. You can hear your mother and the insects buzzing through your garden, and you can hear Grandpierre, her grandfather, in the waves. These are the ancestors who love you. You are more connected to them than to Séverine. She only wanted you because she was greedy." Corinne tried to remember the dream so she could explain it better, but the images had vanished. All that was left was a feeling of dread. "Do you feel better now?" Corinne saw the concern behind her papa's smile. "Yes, Papa," she said, "but what about Laurent?" "We will find him, don't worry. He stood up and glanced toward the road. You'd better go, or all your customers will wonder what happened to the best oranges on the island. Corinne gathered oranges from her tree in the front yard before she went on her way. She passed the dry well to her left and the line of orange trees on her right. The trees formed a wall behind the road and the mahogany forest, where the Jumbies lived. People had long picked the trees bare, but the wood and leaves still smelled of sharp, sweet citrus. She brushed by a blooming hibiscus bush. A couple of hummingbirds darted between its bright pink flowers. Bees droned in the morning sun that beamed through the forest leaves. Corinne began to skip. She went past the full well and went to the baker's shop until she reached the market. The first thing she saw there was a crack in the stone wall at the south entrance. It must have broken during the earthquake. She wove her way around the vendors, past wooden crates and colorful cloths spread on the hard ground where sellers displayed their produce. At her usual spot, she opened up her own cloth and began laying her oranges out. But the ruckus of people selling their goods, buyers haggling, and animals bleating and clucking was replaced by a low hum of voices talking about the earthquake. It was a real strong one, eh? One of her neighbors with eyes like dark pebbles. Let me start again. It was a real strong one, eh? One of her neighbors with eyes like dark, dull pebbles said to the woman next to her. Yes, true. Everybody was patching up this morning, the other woman said. She rubbed her dry elbows, then rearranged the eddos on her crate. A few vendors to the left of them, a dark woman with her head tied in a colorful cloth called out, cutting through the whispers, tamarind for sale, tamarind for juice, tamarind for sauce. But despite her best efforts, no one seemed to be listening. Corinne looked around for Drew and her mother. They were usually at the market early to sell the sugar cane from her father's fields and the peppers from their garden. She left their space clear and scanned the crowd, avoiding looks from both vendors and customers. Over the last few months, Corinne had learned that a slight curve in the lip might mean a cruel thought from one person, a tiny squint signaled suspicion from another, and a stiffness in the muscles meant fear from someone else. These subtle body changes meant Corinne was being judged because of who she was, half Jumbie. As she searched the crowd, Corinne locked eyes with the oldest woman in the market, the White Witch. She was the only person who had looked at her exactly the same way since the first time they saw each other. The old woman, dark-skinned with sparse white braids on her head, sat in the shade of the only tree in the marketplace. A blanket spread out before her bent knees displayed bottles filled with colored liquids and seeds folded inside newsprint. Corinne nodded politely and continued searching the crowd. She waved to Mrs. Chow, who sold fruit preserved in red brine from glass jars. The plums were Corinne's favorite. When Mrs. Chow caught Corinne's eye, she dipped a wooden spoon into the plum jar and folded a few of them into a piece of torn brown paper. She sent a little girl with ribbons tied to her sleek black hair over to Corinne. Hi, Marlene, Corinne said when the girl got near. Marlene sucked her thumb and held out the brown paper, which was beginning to soak through with the red brine. Corinne took the plums, and Marlene grabbed 2 oranges and counted them off on her fingers. Even though it was their usual exchange, Marlene always counted them off. I like your oranges, she said. Thank you, said Corinne. You don't have any customers, Marlene added. She reached out to the pouch that was tied to Corinne's waist and tried to jingle it. The sound was dismal. How come? Corinne shrugged. No one wants to buy any, she said. Sometimes I eat too many plums and cherries when I'm helping Mama put them in the jars. And then my stomach hurts, and I don't ever want to see any of those things. And then they smell so good, I go and get some more. Corinne said. Just wait. People will want oranges again. Maybe they had too many before. Marlene took off before Corinne could respond. Careful, girl, Miss Aileen called out, knocking over her eddos in the process. There's a child gone missing. Get back to your mother, quick. First the earthquake, and then that, her pebble-eyed friend said, clucking her tongue. They were talking about it at the river this morning. The mother is going crazy. Maybe she just wandered off. Children do that. Corinne looked up. He didn't wander off. The two women looked down at her as though they were surprised she was still there. The waves were coming in hard on the beach and it was difficult to run, Corinne continued. He probably fell somewhere and got caught in the mess the water brought in. But what is this child talking about, Evelyn? Miss Eileen asked as she scratched at her elbows. She turned back to Corinne. A little girl went missing at the river this morning when her mother was out washing clothes. You mean to say another child got lost? Miss Evelyn asked. Her pebble eyes squinted. In moments, the entire market was buzzing about 2 missing children, and both of them gone missing by the water, Miss Eileen observed. I wonder, Miss Evelyn said, taking a sideways glance at Corinne, if it's another Jumbie. As the word bounced from mouth to mouth, all the eyes in the market looked from Corinne to the White Witch and back again. And that's chapter 5. Alright, so let me know if you want me to go and get the Jumbies so we can read the first one. But I like this one so far. And I think everybody had a good time on the Gim Kit, and we'll do some more next week. Take care, everybody.